Good afternoon, everyone. It's the final Friday of the month. It is 3 p.m. in the UK, which means, of course, mark date in your diary. It's time for PMI Live. My name is Rich Seddon. I'm managing partner at PMI. As I say, it's great to have you with us. We're back after our summer break. And even better to be able to welcome you all to the first episode of the autumn season. It really is wonderful to have you with us. You may have gathered we love doing these things, and we've got a great session for you this afternoon. I'd like to say a special hello to all of those joining us on the live streams on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and the other one, YouTube. That's the fella. Yeah, if you are on those live streams and you do want to still join us in the live session, you can register on the website, pmi.co.uk/webinars. So we've had lots going on over the summer. In fact, I think it's fair to say it's been huge. Our delivery teams have been working with more clients in more sectors and on more learning and consulting projects than at any time in our history. And you may be able to see these weary individuals on a Friday afternoon may reflect that. Hopefully we're going to liven up a little bit so we get the discussion going. Simultaneously, our development teams have been working on 3 major new product launches. First is our new leadership suite, which we're going to talk about more in this webinar. Second is an all-new on-demand and distance learning versions of our Lean Six Sigma Black Belt programs. And thirdly is our much-loved Process Manager Handbook, which celebrates its 30th anniversary of its first edition next year. In light of that, we have completely redeveloped it as an interactive app with both on-demand learning content built in and an AI chatbot as well. All 3 of these things will be launched this autumn, so please do keep an eye out. Oh, and in addition to that, we've rebranded the business, as you may have noticed, and we've got a brand new website coming out next week. Lots going on. On the subject of keeping an eye out, the best place to do so and find the latest and greatest from us is by following us on LinkedIn. My glamorous assistant, Neil, who's working away in the background, there he goes, has just put that in the chat. That's a link to our company page. Go to that, click follow, and you'll get all the latest thought leadership, content, announcements, etc. From us that our Generate Demand team keep really busy to make sure it keeps both creative and interesting, and more importantly, useful to you, the practitioners out there. Our title today is Leading for Success. Do you have a leadership problem? Sounds rather accusatory, and we'll talk about that and why we're describing that in those terms later on. Our session, as you may have gathered, takes the form of an interactive panel, and I'm joined by that interactive panel on screen now. So please do join in. These things work best when you participate. Take advantage of having these guys here and interact with the discussion. So 2 functions I'd like to point out to you. If you have any general observations or contributions to the discussion, please use the chat button. If you have a specific question you'd like to ask, please use the Q&A. I'll be facilitating today. I'll keep an eye on those feeds and putting your inputs to the panel. On that note, enough of me already. Let's introduce the panel, or ask the panel to introduce themselves more like. So let's start with Warren.
Thanks, Rich. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Warren Knight. I'm a director consultant and head of strategy here in PMI. Looking forward to this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Warren. And I've got an extra special guest just performing for us in the background here as well. Not part of the panel, I'm relieved to say. Suze.
I don't know, might have a contribution. You never know with your cats. So hello, everyone. I'm Suze Clark. I'm also one of the managing partners at PMI. In my day-to-day work, I do a lot of client management, so have a lot of conversations with leaders, and also am responsible for our thought leadership content. So the sort of content that you would see if you go to our Knowledge Hub if you follow us on LinkedIn.
Fabulous, short and sweet. Thank you very much, Suze. Ian, I can see you're on mute there. So before we start that embarrassing routine for you, there we go. Ian, hello.
Hello, everyone. My name's Ian George. Background is in the leadership stuff. That's what doctorate's in. And no surprise, I'm supporting heavily on the leadership development program.
Great to have you with us. So one of the things that these guys all have in common is they work with PMI clients across sectors and industries. So one of the things we're aiming to do today is try and talk about that experience and share that experience in the different settings, contexts. But more importantly, as I mentioned earlier on, we'd really love your input as well as the audience. So let me share my screen and we can see what is going on. So what we're going to cover today, Ian, do you want to run us through that? And then you've got some positioning slides, haven't you, before we go into the discussion session itself?
We have, yeah. So what we were thinking about was right back in the original stuff around this was, what is it that leaders actually do? You know, rather than just the theoretical stuff and the soft stuff, you know, hard-nosed stuff in the business world on a day-to-day basis. What do they do? So that's where we started. And then we thought about all of the statistics that we hear about, that it goes wrong and people get frustrated and so on and so forth. So what is going on there? And then what we're looking at is taking that forward and saying, okay, that's all the negative stuff. What can we do about it? What can we practically do to help our clients, help those around us, those in the community, and our stakeholders, you know, the big network? What can we offer them that's different, innovative, reflects the needs of the people we're working with, and will have an impact through the leaders in their organizations? And that's really what we're going to talk about today.
Okay, great. So let's get your first slide up for you, Ian.
Okay, so going right back to the beginning is when we think about is it a verb or is it a noun? And this actually came from PMI 25 years ago when I was a boy, and they taught me what is now called Lean Six Sigma. And we were doing supply development stuff, and what we were seeing was that some organizations, they run through it and they really get it and they shoot forward, great performance, great achievements. Some struggle through, but they get there, and some did unfortunately fail and they had to be pushed to the side. So what was it that caused that? No surprise, came back to leadership. But actually, more subtly than that, it was not just having leaders, but having leaders that didn't just have the job title, they actually did the job. And that's the difference. You know, we talk about successful and failing leaders. I think a failing leader is one who relies on their job title. A successful leader is one who doesn't need to rely on the job title. You just know they're there. You see them, you spot them. You don't know why. You just know. And that's what we're talking about here. So when we talk about a verb, we're talking about what they do. And one of the key things, one of the first pieces of advice I got given as a leader was, somebody said to me, they said, right, Ian, you're a leader now, you're in the senior leadership team. I want you to support, I want you to enable, I want you to encourage and challenge. I even want you to provoke some people. But what I don't want you to do is do the job for them. And that's probably one of the best pieces of advice I've ever had, because the role of leadership is so complex, it's so difficult and subtle, that what we need to be doing is make sure that our leaders stand above. They're almost like the meerkat that's watching the territory, checking everybody's safe, everybody's doing what they need to be doing. They're not heads down, buried in there, waiting to be side blinded by something hitting them from left or right field. And so what these guys do is they're constantly asking these three questions. Where are we? Where do we need to be in the future? And how will we get there? And it's they're not answering the questions, but they're asking them, because what they're trying to do is get everybody to keep thinking, not just doing, thinking, looking forward, looking around themselves, getting beyond just ticking the box. God, did that one, got through the day. And so that's where we're positioned in leadership in terms of supporting the people, enabling the organization. But the problem is, when we look at the failure of organizations and the problems that we have with organizational performance declining over time, what we see is that those same leaders or that population, what they do is they tend to get sucked into the detail. They get sucked into, because it's not going fast enough. That's one of the biggest challenges they have. It's just not happening fast enough. Why can't these people do it? And the point is, there's stuff that's been missed or dropped. And so what we see is the leader try to subordinate themselves into that role. They start doing stuff. They get sucked into the detail. They disappear in the weeds, and then they're gone. And then ultimately the program as a whole fails, because there's nobody standing up there being a leader, as we would generally see that. And so that's why it becomes the graveyard of lots of people who get elevated into these positions. And unfortunately, one of the biggest problems is that leadership is not seen as a profession. It's just something you slip into. And so what we're trying to do is close that by offering the professional route forward in a very applied way, so that as you develop as a leader, the organization develops in terms of its performance. And that's very much what we're looking for. So it's complex, it's difficult. So let's have a look at what do you do? You've told us what the problem is. You've scared the pants off me. Now give me some help here. And what we spotted was, so the research was 125 companies, 10,000 data points of action, and what it split out to over and over again. So there was 4 months of research. It was a slog, but what it kept coming down to was these 4 areas: purpose. What are we trying to accomplish? Why are we here? And it's not just the end outcome; it's interim as well. What's my next step? Why am I doing that? What's the step after that going to be? And why am I doing that? And so on and so forth. Building that program, that roadmap of what am I trying to do? Now, the way we do that, it's a no-brainer for people on this sort of call, is we use processes. We're not just talking about the end improved process that people will then operate in the steady state. We're talking about the transformation processes as well. What have we learned about the last time we improved something that means we can improve it better next time, and so on? How does we embed that as a set of processes so it becomes part of our DNA, not just something we do when it's gone wrong? That then leads us on to, if you want to operate good processes, you tend to need good people, enabled, supported, qualified, trained, developed. And so very much building our people. This is where the soft stuff that often gets used with leadership comes in, of how do we engage those people? How do we take them along? How do we make them feel that this is their program and the success will be part of their success as well? And there's no surprise here, is when we're looking at performance, is yes, there's the outcome, but actually how are we measuring progress? How are we measuring people in terms of changing the expectations we place on them? It's almost like you send somebody on a training course, you train them, and then you put them back into exactly the same environment they were in before. Guess what? By the end of the week, they're back to doing what they were doing before you sent them. Okay, you might have got better benefits from taking everybody out for the night, making them just feel good about themselves. So if we want to change things, we need to change all 4 of those. And the thought I would leave you with on this slide is, you take any one of those out of the equation and have a think about the consequences. Are you still going to get the outcomes that you desire and that you need?
Thanks, Ian. That's really useful positioning, and I'm sure it's set the scene well for us. So let's just think about these questions that we're going to ask. And again, remind you folks, keep your questions coming. What I was hearing here, which I think is an overarching theme for us, is 2 things. One is around the structure and the informed structure of both the development of leaders and the execution of the leadership role, as it were. And the second thing you just reminded me there, Ian, is when you talk about slipping into these roles accidentally. I interviewed Tanya Aitken from the CMI, the Chartered Management Institute, a couple of months ago, sorry, for one of our podcasts, and she talked a lot about the accidental manager. And the people that were good at the task, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're well equipped to lead and do leadership as you describe it. And I think that's I can see plenty of nodding going on here. That's a theme that we see regularly. So our first question, folks, is how do you know if you've got a leadership problem in the first place? Neil's going to pop this into the chat for us so you can see the question and refer back to it. We'd love to hear your take as we proceed on this, folks. But first of all, how do we know we've got a leadership problem? Warren, I'm going to come to you with that first.
Right. Okay. I think there's several indicators. So obviously listening to Ian's sort of intro there, and this this implementation piece. Absolutely agree with all of that. But actually, for me, also, there's a real need for a shared vision. If you're going to have transformation, we've got to have a shared vision, and of course, that is, you know, a primary job of the leader to encourage that. So indications are lack of proactivity in that area. So what I see is organisations where you know that there is no clear priorities. So the organisation seems to, well, the priorities change very regularly. You know, on a weekly basis, there's some issue, there's some different focus. So it feels like the organisation's just being constantly pushed around by reacting to the environment, or indeed everything's a priority, and the leaders are not being proactive and not being tough enough to say, okay, so what are the real must-haves here that we need to focus upon? I think actually moving to more the implementation side, there's a lack of proactivity around innovation. So an indicator here would be a constant expecting different results, yet there's no clear, discernible change in approach. And actually, sometimes an active kind of sandbagging of you know, let's keep a steady ship, let's keep it as it is, rather than recognizing that innovation is absolutely fundamental to moving the organization forward. And I think the other way that manifests itself about a lack of proactive encouragement and innovation is an imbalance in drive for change, which comes too much bottom up and not enough top down. And it feels like employees are having to almost, you know, do that leadership work of identifying where the issues are, of upselling the need for change.
And you're talking about kind of appetite or recognition of the need, aren't you, from that bottom-up description you've given?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's both. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Suze.
Well, I just I had to pick up on Warren's last point about that bottom up, and really what I wanted to say in relation to the question you're asking is, you know, for those people who are at that bottom and trying to push up, you know, how do they know they've got a problem? Well, improvement projects start, but they stop. Yeah, they wither, and just nobody's really loving them and paying attention to them. Maybe there's no sponsor assigned. If there is someone assigned, they're not really getting involved. They avoid going to meetings with the project leader. You know, worse than that, improvement projects start, and then one of the senior stakeholders runs in and says, stop that, I've got it, I know what we're going to do, and we're into a JDI. Just, you know, they've got a better idea, and no one's actually checking and analyzing and measuring, and is this really what we ought to be doing? Because somebody senior has said, just do this. And that's what I think those people experience who are trying to push from the bottom. It's all of those things that if they see that happening to them, I'd be really interested in our audience if any of them do experience that. But if you see those things, then chances are you've got some kind of leadership problem there.
Yeah, I mean, and letting go is hard, isn't it? So when things need doing, everything needs doing, everything's on fire. Letting go of something and recognizing you just can't tackle anything is so critically difficult, isn't it? And I think that's kind of reflective of what both of you are saying there, about where's the appetite and where's the direction coming from and who's the arbiter of all of this within there. So we've had some comments in the chat that before we move on, Ian, a question for you specifically from the 4 pillars on your previous slide. So process, people, purpose and performance, not in that order, purpose, process, people, performance. Which do you feel is the most important, if any, to focus on?
The greatest answer here is always, it depends. So when you talk about leadership, for me, leadership is situational. A couple of things we've talked about is, you know, we have the accidental leader, is they're good, but really we define that as they're good in a situation. And if you think about it, we see it all the time, somebody who's really high performing and you think, but if they got put over there, it would all fall apart.
Yeah.
because they know how to do what they do. So with the 4Ps is the situational issue is purpose is when I'm starting out, making sure everybody knows what the purpose is, what we're trying to achieve, you know. Then once they know what we're trying to achieve, engaging them in developing the process. Let's agree collectively, how are we going to do this? And what is it we're doing? Right, we've got to think about performance. What's the outcome we're looking for? Okay, if we know that, right, let's go back and have a look at does that reflect the purpose? Yes. Is the process still valid? Yes. And if you're doing all of those sorts of things and going through that cycle, basically PDSA with the people, guess what? You've dealt with the people issue. So ultimately, people, and that's going to come through all the time in everything. But then the others are going to be, well, we need a purpose. What does that look like in terms of outcomes? We need performance. How are we going to get from that purpose to that performance? We need different processes.
Yeah.
All the way it's people. So I'll go back to the point of take any one of those out. What does it do to the potential for the outcome? What's the risk it introduces? And
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
then tells you which is the most important at a point in time.
Yeah. So back to that context question.
Yeah.
So Warren, I'll come to you in a moment if that's all right. Couple of comments to just share. So in terms of indicators from the audience, we've got one here. When the culture promoted from, this is answering the question, how do you know you've got a leadership problem? When the culture promoted from leaders doesn't align with the company values. That's one. Another one one indicator that I have seen is the migration of a senior team supporting around the leader rather than being on their own. Interesting stuff. Thank you very much, folks, for those comments. I can see I've got some questions in there that I'm actually going to put it to the panel later on because they relate to one of our later topics. Warren, you had your hand up there.
Oh, it's just a small point about, and of course, the accidental manager leader. Of course, the knowledge, the theories that got them into that position in a dynamic, changing business environment probably aren't going to be the theories to take them forward. So, so that innovation is not just for the organisation; it's how they're innovating their ideas.
Yeah. Okay. So let's look at this from another angle then with our second question. And that is, what sort of people make good leaders? Now, again, folks, observations, your thoughts on this as we put it to the panel. Really great collaboration coming in here. So Neil is about to pop that question in, and there it is. What sort of people make good leaders? Suze, I'm going to come to you first with this one.
Well, I really appreciated the comments that Ian was making at the beginning about the questions, and the advice that he'd been given as a leader about asking great questions, challenging people, and so on. And for me, it's what that the word that I think of when in that sense is a leader is someone who will be curious, someone who will be really interested. Therefore, they're also a really good listener. They ask the great question, but then they listen, and they want to go to where the work's being done, and they want to be and feel part of that so that they experience it for themselves. I don't mean all the time, and I'm not suggesting they do the work. They need to work on the system, not in the system, but they are in touch with what the people are experiencing, and from there they can hear the great ideas that are just occurring in the everyday. They can feel the problems that are occurring in the everyday, and I think that makes a real change. But you'll only do that if you're curious. So that's for me the word I would think of when I think about that.
Okay, fantastic. Ian, can I come to you with the same question? Just think about your experience and what you've witnessed. What sort of people make good leaders?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm going to be a little bit different here, I think, because for me, I've always been in an environment where I've either been trying to help people solve problems or deal with issues or just generally improve. And so what I've noticed around good leaders is they're demanding and they challenge people, but they also enable them to achieve. So, if there's a roadblock, they're there by your side and they're helping you. And that's what these guys do. So the off the wall bit is actually what they do is they introduce stress into your world. And the point I'm making here is that if you're not stressed, then you're not in a position to move from your current position. And so part of what we're talking about when we're in the leadership program that we've got is the well-being issues that we've got here. And the leaders, they've got this balancing act that's constantly changing, because what they've got to do is get you above that apathy barrier. So you're going to do something, you don't know what it is yet, but they've got to keep you beneath that crisis ceiling as well. So
Yeah.
you're not rabbits in the headlight, just about to get run over. So yeah, they're demanding, but they're enabling. The other thing is they have forgiveness, because if you're being stretched and you're being put into a position where you're doing things you've never done before, you're going to make mistakes. And
Mhm.
what you need is somebody that's going to say, that wasn't very good, was it? Let's have a think about it. What can we learn from that? What can we do differently next time?
Mhm.
And that's what we want. When you've got that, you're engaged. I'll give you another really brief story. I joined a company and the job was absolutely awful. And after 3 months, I was going to go back to the UK for Christmas. And I went to my boss, wished him a happy Christmas, and said, look, I might not be coming back in January. Said, this job absolutely sucks. He didn't say anything. He got up from his desk, walked to his door, closed the door, held it closed with his hand, and said to me, I've been here for 5 years. How do you think I feel?
Right.
And at that point, he had my attention and we talked about it and we worked out a deal. And I stayed with him in 2 jobs for 6 years. Best 6 years. I learned the most things, but all the time I knew he was going to push me and push me and push me. And from time to time, I had to say to him, I don't know what to do. I don't know what comes next. And he just used to smile at me and say, yeah, it's fun, isn't it?
Okay. Thanks, Ian. Thanks very much. So some comments in from the audience. We've got responding to this question: sort of people make good leaders. People who listen, who are authentic, and ultimately make a decision. Also, an ability to say we/I have made a mistake. That's great. So further, 2 things come to mind. That is self-awareness, being aware of their own character and their own strengths and weaknesses. See, it's what I was telling you guys earlier on.
Nobody's saying anything about telling people.
It will allow them to amplify their strengths, but also use people around them to support them when they may not be where they may not be particularly strong. Yeah, great one, that. Thank you very much for that. So loads of stuff coming in. Got another one here: being bold, willing to take action, speak up, and speak out where appropriate. I'm getting a theme here from all of your responses, and for the first 2 questions, I've got several themes here. I've just been making some notes, and these are in no particular order. I've got involvement, I've got curiosity, I've got empathy, listening, learning, collaboration, direction setting, the sense of process, and involvement. So if those are all the things we need to know if we've got a problem, and the kind of things that we look for in good leaders, let's think about question 3. This is all suggesting that we need to do something about this to actually have some formal development processes, isn't it? So question 3, how do we make the time to develop leaders? And Warren, I'm going to come to you on this one first.
Well, I think first of all, with any kind of development, you've got to really be committed to developing yourself, okay, and recognizing that, okay, because otherwise, if you don't have that real deep commitment, you are not going to find the time.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, and I don't think one of the things I was going to say to the earlier question, and it was mentioned in your list, but I think it needs to be accentuated further. A good leader recognizes that learning is fundamental. It's fundamental to innovation. It's fundamental to improvement. And actually, the job of a good leader is to, Ian, you mentioned to enable. It's to enable that learning to in others, whether that's doing it through resources, whether that's through personal coaching and teaching. The idea of a leader teacher. As far as developing leadership is concerned, it's not a 2-day course. Actually, it's about on-the-job learning. Primarily for me, it's about developing theories about your situation, having a prediction about that theory. So if I apply that theory, what's going to happen? And then actually trying it out. And making the space to then review that and refine that theory. Okay, the whole adopt, adapt, abandon. Now, of course, there's need for theory input, there's need for guidance and having somebody to reflect. That's where the coaching thing comes in executive coaching support. But fundamentally, a lot of this can be done real time in the workplace, and needs to be, because that's the type of learning we're talking about. We're not talking about classroom-based learning. And I think a lot of leaders, when they hear actually leaders need to learn, there's too much connection with being in a classroom.
Okay. Ian, what's your take on this question? How do we make the time to develop leaders?
I mean, very much. I'm going to build on what Warren said. Is my view really strongly. If you want to develop your leadership team, then develop your organisation, because that will create the space and the demand for that leadership to develop. They've got to have real world issues to work on. But really what we're also looking at is they've got to see the benefits and the impact of what they do. When you're a kid, you can sit in front of a classroom teacher at a desk and you just soak it up. But as you get older, your brain changes and we learn in different ways. So we're into the action-based learning of, I now know, don't put your finger in the flame, it's gonna hurt. I know that sort of stuff. There's a subtlety in the complexity of how we learn as adults. And we need to experience that and develop things. So very much it's a case of, if I'm going to do something, what is, instead of intuitively doing it, what's the process and the theories I've got in my head that I'm using to make me go in that direction? Did it work? If not, why not? And that reflective piece we have afterwards often gets missed, because what we do, we're either, if it goes well, we just pat ourselves on the back, feel good, and then I'll do that again next time, not thinking about the situation. If it goes badly, it's like, oh, I've got to fix it, and then we're into scrambling, and we haven't got time to do any learning because I'm fixing and putting out fires. It's like, right, I'm not doing that again. Or unless I get bored, and then I will do it again.
And I think a point I'd add to that, Ian, is that I've observed leadership teams fooling themselves by saying the word, we need to learn from this, and doing absolutely zero about it, other than saying the words, and then being surprised when next season, next year, whatever it is, and frustrated in equal measure. But I said we had to learn from the last time this occurred. Why didn't that happen? Warren, I see you've got your hand up.
Well, just again, just what Ian's done is spark that point about the classroom is great for collecting information, but information, let's be clear, is not knowledge, and it's certainly not wisdom. So yes, we can learn in the classroom about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and motivation. That's information, okay, but until we have a theory around that and we practice it, we don't have knowledge. We don't have a way of inspiring people.
Cool, thanks everyone. Suze, I want to come to you with a question related to this that was posed earlier on in the chat. What part do you think executive coaching plays in leadership development / embedding learning? And have you been coached? And if so, how would you describe your experience? And let's talk generally. That's the question. Let's talk generally in your experience.
Okay, so one of the things I think that executive coaching does is it gives a leader, gives anyone who's who's experienced in that, the space, and the space to think when they're not actually trying to do all the other things they have to do. So let's say they've got a 1 hour coaching and 2 hour coaching. Very rare that they have that much space to really think about themselves and to really think about what is it that's making me do this? What is it that's making me think this? What is it that's making me react like this? It's such a gift to have that opportunity. I also think that great executive coaching is all about them. It's not the person you're coaching. It's not about the coach, and so it can create amazing epiphanies about how we work. So my answer to the second one is, have I ever been coached? And yes, I was, because I was in a leadership position that I funny enough, on the question of time, struggling for time. And why was I struggling for time? People were constantly in my office, constantly asking questions. What should we do about this? What should we do about that? We were in a very high pressured environment. And I felt I needed some support and development. I couldn't see what it was I wasn't doing. And through the coaching process, I started to understand that what I was doing all the time was responding to the questions that were coming through the door, which was feeding the people that if they came through my door and they asked me a question, I'd give them an answer. And at the point where I stopped doing that, I started to actually take some time and sit down with them and say, so what would you do in this situation? If you had any chance, what might you do? And I changed that behavior of myself as a leader. They started to come to me and they would say in future, this has happened. I think I should do this. And that was a much quicker conversation to have. And eventually they didn't even need to have to come and ask unless it was a crisis. They knew what to do. And it was me enabling them to see that and me allowing them to see that because I was stopping pushing information out to them. I'd recommend it, just in case anyone hasn't guessed that that's how I feel about it.
That came across very clearly. Thanks. It's really useful, really useful context, though. Thank you. So we are wheeling into question 4 here, which I'm going to put to all 3 of you, just to warn you, which is, what are the best examples of effective leadership that you've seen? Ian, let's start with you.
Okay, so yeah, I'm thinking about this one. I think the best examples of leadership I've seen are those that you don't notice unless you're really looking for them.
Okay, such as?
This is, I think, trust. You're working for somebody, you trust them. So this is, you can go to them with a problem, you can talk to them about stuff. And so that's number one, is going to be trust is a real issue. And I think also leaders who've taught me as I've gone along, exactly what Susie's saying is, rather than telling me, they taught me, because they made me think about it and they made me take the decision and take responsibility for that decision. It's great. I can tell somebody what to do and it's like, well, that didn't work. Yeah, but he told me, he said, do it. Well, where's the leadership in that? What I've done, thinking I'm a leader, is created abdication in the person that I'm working with. Well, that's not leadership. And we've talked about the fact they were demanding of me, but gave me support. I think if I reflect on all of that, I've suddenly gone from a massive population of people down to a very few. As old as I am, I'm into, I can count them probably on one hand, how many really good leaders I've worked for. And that's the problem, is we need lots more really good men and women, and they're out there, but they need that support to get there. They need to work out, how do I engender trust in people? How do I challenge people without overstressing them? How do I support them? How do I get the best out of them? How do I get them to get out the best out of the people that they're working with? How do I become the leader of leaders? And that's really what we've got to get to, is that position. And part of that's professionalism. Part of that is experience. Part of that is sharing in networks. But really important, it's Yeah. I'm, the more I'm thinking, I've got 3 people in my head that I would class as really good leaders, and they're people I'm still in touch with. They're people I trust that I would tell things to, and they're people who I have gone to and say, I don't know how to do this, or I think I've screwed it up. What can we do? Can you help me?
Thanks, Ian. And the theme of trust is coming through very strongly on both the live streams and the chat here. Warren, come to you with that same question. What are the best examples of effective leadership that you've seen?
Actually, it's a particular executive team who actually invest a lot of their very, very valuable time. Like any executive team, they're very busy. Actually, as Sue said, being present, being there, actually during the workshops, to firstly demonstrate is that congruent, that being congruent, wanting to actually demonstrate that they are really interested and supportive of the actions that they're asking their staff to take. It's a way for them to really learn about what's actually going on in reality and keep touch with that, as their processes, their people, their customers, and also to not control, but to intervene in a supportive way, add challenge, like Ian's saying. And for me, this everything we said here, if you take all this into account, it's going to take a lot of effort. It takes a hell of a lot of effort to lead and to be a good leader, and
do so consistently.
Yes, over time. Yeah, it's not just something we're going to turn on for this week and then it'll dissipate out. And I think for me, it's that recognition of putting your hand in your pocket, okay, for budget. That's just the start of the investment that you need to make, and the investment is much more personal.
Yeah, I agree. Suze, coming to you with the same question. So, best examples of effective leadership that you've seen.
Yeah, so the best one of the best examples that I ever saw was so working with quite a large organization, but in the IT division of that. They had, I would say they were a reasonably mature organization. So they did set goals and they set strategy. And so the scenario that I was working with the IT leader in was that the CTO had developed a series of goals, and those had been cascaded. He'd received that information, and he saw his job as needing to now respond to that. So what are the things we're going to do to achieve those goals? So there were 2 things that I liked about how he went about it. The first was he did not sit down and just work it out for himself. The first thing he did was he got everyone together. And there were there's got to be about 25 people who got into a room. So, he posed the question to them: if these are the goals, what are the things we need to do to achieve those? And there was a structure. There is it was a collaboration. It was a bit of a brainstorming. Information come out. What do we like? What don't we like? Which do we think will be successful? Won't be? And so on and so forth. Within that process, there was some really clear guidance up front before people started on the brainstorming. What might we do? And the guidance he gave at the very beginning was, when you think about all the things that we can do, I want you to think about it as if you were the CTO. Okay, and so think about the CTO. How would the CTO think of this? What would he respond to it? What would he respond to the ideas that you're coming up with? And what would he say if you went back to him with that idea? What I liked about that was that it gave an extra edge thinking about the stakeholder in the organization that you're responding to, and kept them in mind. So I'm not saying it completely stopped people with their own little pet projects. I've always wanted to do that, but it enabled them to then question themselves: is that going to deliver one of the objectives or not? And if they couldn't see a link, then it was easy to say that's not going to be what we're going to do. And that so not only having a process to work through it and a system of how we're going to do this all together, but also what's the mindset you need and think about your stakeholder. And I really liked that.
Yeah. Thanks, Suze. So just round up with some comments that are on the board here. So we've got what makes effective leadership: someone who's willing to invest the time in you and pushes you to develop and grow, and will support you in this. Senior leaders that are willing to go back to the floor, as it were, to understand the everyday challenges the most junior members of the team. So we've got a question as well, which is there are a number of high-profile news stories that I'd like currently that I'd like to ask the panel. What guidance advice would you give to someone struggling to do the right thing due to existing unhelpful leadership culture in their organisation? I'm going to put that to you, Warren. You look like you're up for that one.
Wow.
Friday afternoon, big questions.
Wow, that's a monster question.
So essentially, we're thinking about here someone that's struggling to do the right thing in an unhelpful leadership culture in their organisation. Susie's offering you a get out warrant.
Yeah,
if you want.
I
Look,
think,
her hand's gone up.
yes,
I
yes.
can
I
see you
need more
pondering,
time to
and I
process
think I
that
know
one.
what you're about to say as well. Suze, go on then.
Well, this isn't the end answer, but my first piece of advice, if that's what I think the question is, what's advice you give, is I'd find a friend, because the chances are that not everybody's unhelpful. So work out who isn't, and then find a way to approach that leader, and build a relationship with that person, and then start to talk about what are the things that are struggling with, and with some evidence and data, and it may not necessarily just be personal. It may be about a number of things, but I think you have to find that friend in the leadership team who will be able to give you some support, because I think it's really hard to do it if you're lower down and if you're on your own.
Ian, you want to respond to that as well?
I was going to basically reinforces that last comment from Suze, is that when you're in that situation, don't feel like you've got to throw yourself on your sword. One of the biggest problems in leadership is leaders recruit people to their level in their own image. So if you've got a problem with the integrity of a leadership team, it could well be endemic. And that's why you get people coming in, being parachuted in from other organizations, different sectors with no experience of those environments. And it's really to shake things up. So I'm being very personal for this individual, is to say, think very carefully, test your theories, as Sue says, with a friend, with other people. But, to be blunt, if it's not going to go anywhere, move on. Because they will drag you down. If you can see it, you're already better than they are. So go and offer that expertise, that brilliant resource to somebody else.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'd add to that
is a competitor.
Yeah. The only thing I'd add to that, Ian, is avoid the power of assumption.
Yeah, absolutely.
Within it all. Cool. So, Ian, you've got whilst we've got you there, let's look at this slide that you've put together. In terms of what good looks like to round up this discussion here.
Yeah. So when we've been talking through this, we've talked very much of, if you want to develop the leadership team, then develop the organization. And so we were thinking about this, and we built this model which sort of says, so, okay, but what would that look like? How could you combine these two together to say, yeah, we know we've got a good leadership team because this is a sort of organization we've now got. And so very much what we're looking at here is, you've got leaders who are setting direction and guiding. They're enabling people to do things, and they're not telling, they're enabling. Real difference there. And by that enablement, your people are starting to become proactive. They're starting to take initiatives themselves. They're not in fear of doing something that's slightly different.
Mhm.
And, building on what we've just been talking, they might test those ideas before they do it just to be safe, but they'll go and do something. Processes that are not just doing stuff, they're doing the things that are needed by the customer of the organization, are needed within the organization, are needed by the people of the organization to make sure that everything is heading towards that North Star and in the right direction. And if we've got that, then we've got that predictability of performance, and that stability is one of the key enablers that's going to let us keep moving forward. Because if we have unpredictable performance, we're going to keep getting dragged back to fix things. We want to know that when we've improved something, almost a definition of continuous improvement, it gets locked in and it keeps delivering, even when we've taken our attention off it. That gives us that foundation to build on, build on, build on. When we've got that, we've got that sustainable performance leadership. And in a volatile world that's changing faster and faster and faster, we're going to need to keep doing all of these things in the triangle more and more and more to maintain that sustainability.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Thanks. So just to summarize some of the points up that we've had here today. So as you've been hearing, leadership is a career step change. It's not necessarily just a continuation. And we've touched on process. We've touched on making the time and some of the tangible things that are necessary to do that. All too often, it's clear we don't take this seriously enough. And leaders must recognize that they have a unique role to play in the organization. It's that noun thing that verb noun thing that Ian was talking about up front, the art and the act of leadership. And critically good leadership enables those in the organization to perform. That's what it's there for, isn't it? That is what good leadership is there for, to enable those to enable the organization to release its latent capacity and talent. And excellence leadership continually improves that performance over time and isn't just satisfied with the status quo. Ian, I think it was you earlier on that mentioned demanding as one of the quality traits of an effective leader. And finally, you've got this point around coaching. We touched on executive coaching a little bit. Develops better leaders than academia alone. That's not to say that the academia isn't important. Obviously, it is. But again, I think we talked at several points around context and situational learning. Both Warren and Ian reiterated that several times, as did the comments throughout the session. So, folks, finally from us, bearing in mind the time, somehow that 55 minutes has whistled by. A few things we'd like to draw your attention to. The leadership development program that we have been touching on here is launching in the autumn. If you would like to be the first to know, it's a QR code on screen. Scan that, fill in the form, and we'll get in touch with you first with the descriptions of the programs, the outlines, and what's involved from right through from assessment through to coaching. And yep, so that should be active now. If you'd like to, just fill that in. I mentioned our Leading for Business Excellence podcast earlier on. This month's episode is with Karen Leftley, the president of the BQF. If you haven't come across our podcast, Leading for Business Excellence podcast before, do hop on over to the website to see it. You can also pick it up on LinkedIn, where all the latest episodes get released. This one is fantastic. So, you just want to say a couple of words of the highlights for you on the interview with Karen?
Well, it's one of the things that she talks about, the dancing man. Which is, if you're finding it hard to make a shift change in your organization, and to create a culture of excellence, find one dancing leader who you can influence and be successful with that one person. Create those changes, create those improvements, because once you've got one leader saying, look at what I'm doing, it's really much easier to get the other leaders to think the same way.
Yeah, thanks, Suze. And also on the screen, you'll see the back catalogue as well, available on the Knowledge Hub. We'll be releasing much more information about the new website, which has a much more interactive and more effective Knowledge Hub coming next week. Very excited about that. It's filterable, it's choppable, it's changeable, it's searchable by all kinds of formats. So yeah, do look out for that by following us on LinkedIn. See what I did there? So finally, and I mean it finally this time, next month's PMI Live is drive your continuous improvement performance with artificial intelligence. I'll be joined by another PMI Live newcomer, a new member of our team, Anthony Richardson, who joined us earlier in the year, who's put together a fantastic presentation already for this. Really interesting session, really practical, what it means for your continuous improvement efforts. Do join myself and Anthony on Friday, the 27th of October at 3 p.m. UK time. So, folks, look out for the Voice of the Customer survey. We're shaping up the new year 2024 schedule. We feed these topics from your suggestions as well as our market and industry insight. Please do keep those suggestions coming, and we will respond to your need as much as we can with a fantastic 24 session. So all that remains to say is thank you very much again for joining us. Thank you so much for all the contributions in the chat and on the live streams. It's been wonderful to have you with us. Thank you to the panel for your insightful discussions.
Great to be
wishing
here.
everyone a fantastic weekend. Cheers, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.